Well, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome, everybody, to the Insight Energy live webinar. My name is Tom Kay. I'm Director of Engagement here at Archant. It is great to see you with us on this very, very hot day. I can assure you that I have my suit on like from top to bottom, and I'm not wearing Bermuda shorts just underneath the screen here, although it was exceptionally tempting. We're going to ask a question today and debate a crucial subject. And that question, as we all know, is, are we ready for net zero? But actually, what is net zero? Does it apply to me? And where do I start? So, as I say, we're going to debate this. We're going to provide you with some insight and some advice so that everybody can start thinking about the steps that they need to take. And I'll introduce you to our esteemed panel in just a minute. But something to say right up front is this is your event, everyone. So we would like you to participate. You can ask any question you like. We'll put them to our experts. All you have to do is hover over the screen and then click on the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we will feed them in. The event today would not have happened without the support of two very special partners. That's Opergy and Norfolk and Suffolk Unlimited. Both progressive, forward-thinking organizations centered right here in our region who passionately champion Norfolk and Suffolk as world leaders in energy and are committed to working with everyone from large companies to local communities to move us forward. So thank you to both of them. And so it's on to our panel, and I'm sure they'll be popping up on your screen. I can see Nigel there, Nigel Cornwall from Net Zero East. They work with business and political leaders, promoting, debating, providing research to help shape long-term influencing around net zero. Mark Goodall is here. Mark is chair of the All Energy Industry Council at the New Anglia LEP and also plays an integral role at Acre Solutions, who deliver energy projects worldwide and have won contracts with Scottish Power recently to design new stations. Catherine Ellis-Jones is here from Vattenfall, producers of two of the largest offshore wind farms in the world. Vattenfall isn't just a business, though. They're exceptionally proud of their commitment to social transformation and providing a real legacy for future generations. Afternoon to Julia Pike from Sizewell C. Now, Julia and her team, they are living and eating and breathing innovation on the Suffolk coast down at Sizewell. That's the centre of many new ways to remove CO2 from our atmosphere, and Julia will be able to tell us more. Penelope Garnay is here. Penelope is head of carbon at BT and is an expert on the digital skills that are critical for net zero and the role that digital technology will play. And Philip McNaughton from British Sugar, who is head of sustainability, and the story of how they have turned their carbon footprint from their three major sites here in the East into so many positives that touch multiple areas of sustainability is something I know everybody will get a lot from. So our panel for you, and we're going to kick off and talk to Nigel. So afternoon to you, Nigel. I can see you there in your t-shirt on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah.
Let's kick things off because we've got a varied group of people joining us today. So there's going to be some people that have joined because they're curious to actually understand what net zero is. What is it?
Good afternoon, Tom. I won't share my Bermuda shorts with you, but net zero is simply a shorthand term that has been politically endorsed to decarbonise the economy across all sectors by 2050. We've had climate targets in place for nearly 20 years, well, 15 years now, and they've been consistently increased. And in June 2019, the government adopted the formal net zero target. That's the beginning of the hard work.
So does every business, Nigel, have to worry about this?
Yes. Climate mitigation affects us all. We all have a part to play. Large corporates and businesses are beginning to develop strategies, but it's something that all of us need to join in at, play our role, because ultimately things won't play out in a nice, smooth, synchronized way. And we just need to get carbon levels to a stable level that will avoid further climate detriment.
Okay. I mean, I wonder if there's some sort of skepticism perhaps around this, in that 2050 seems like a very long time away. I mean, people, are they thinking, well, I don't have to really worry about this just yet?
I think a lot of people are of that mindset. I think government is trying to improve knowledge levels of the issues, the options, and in fact, it's organised the first National Net Zero Awareness Week in July this year. Very necessary, because I think there's a lack of understanding of some of the profound changes needed, not just in terms of traditional economic production, but also in terms of how we live our lives, how we use land, and how we can correct the position that we have created.
And we talk about businesses, but businesses essentially are made up of individuals. So does this start with each and every one of us doing more?
Yes, I personally believe, as somebody who runs businesses, that we also have an additional duty to show leadership where we can. People are finding their way. A lot of people are unconvinced. So there has to be, you have to lead from the front and show people what good looks like.
What's your tips to those business leaders that are listening and going, well, I'm really on the journey, but how do I lead from the front?
There are many ways we can all do, from how we procure services and equipment, how we buy our energy, how we travel, which can bring short-term immediate benefits. The key is making sure they all add up to hitting what is a very challenging, more than challenging target. And that's why the awareness side of this is so important.
We'll talk about technology and the role that technology plays in this a little bit later on. But again, thinking about what businesses might be thinking, 30 years seems like a very long time away. A lot of businesses are changing at a much shorter pace. Would it be a fair thing to say, well, look, if I start to put plans in place now, they're going to be obsolete by the time we get to 2050, and everything will have changed anyway. So maybe I should just sort of sit and watch how things pan out.
Yeah, you can't future-proof everything, but you can get on with the things you can do today. And fortuitously, you can actually be in a better place through doing the right things now. You can reduce your bills, you can develop more sustainable product chains, you can develop more biodiversity in the natural environment. There are a whole combination of reasons as to why we have to get on with it. But the trigger is the net zero target, and it is timely and very necessary.
And what might happen to me if I don't achieve that target? I mean, is there going to be some kind of penalty?
Very hard to say. Rates of climate change are accelerating. This isn't just a national issue, it's obviously an international issue. And just like as a business, you have to show some leadership, and that's what our government is trying to do. Technology and options will change, but you can't beat doing something today, particularly if it creates benefits to you as an individual, as an organisation, or as a country. And I'm very firmly of that view.
Okay, thank you. So that's great. That gives us some context as to what net zero is. Let's bring in Mark Goodall from the All Energy Industry Council at the LEP. Mark, you get a bird's eye view of the energy industry. So let's talk about how the sector's doing. Is the sector itself on track to be net zero by 2050?
So yeah, good afternoon, Tom. And yeah, I think it's the challenge is huge. Let's face it. But what I would say is that the energy transition is not something new. It's just, I would say, upped its intensity and accelerating far more than ever before. I think public opinion has been influential. with the whole climate change debate having a far higher public profile than ever before. Commentators such as David Attenborough and young activist Greta Thunberg, I would suggest, have been quite instrumental in this. And accordingly, I think public pressure to speed up the transition is driving governments, obviously, to make bold political, policy, and financial commitments during this decade as statements of intent towards achieving the target of net zero by 2050. You know, and typically, I guess examples of that would be in offshore wind to quadruple the existing 10 gigawatts installed to 40 gigawatts by 2030, or in terms of hydrogen, to create 5 gigawatts of hydrogen from zero pretty much today. So yeah, some big challenges out there for sure.
So some big challenges, but also I would imagine some big opportunities as well that have been created here in our region as a result of this. And I know that we'll talk to our other guests about some of the things happening in their specific areas. But give us an overview of what is happening to make Norfolk and Suffolk a real centre of excellence.
Okay, perhaps set the scene a little. So when speaking to sort of colleagues and clients, particularly in other countries, I would suggest it's quite clear that the UK is being seen at a more advanced stage of the energy transition in terms of stating and acting on its ambitions than many other developed nations. As an example, thus far in the last decade, the shift from, shall we say, dirtier coal to lower emission natural gas has undoubtedly helped reduce power plant emissions, with gas emitting less than half the CO2 produced by burning coal, for example. And of course, this region has had a huge part to play in terms of producing gas from the North Sea. Example of that, as recent as 2012, coal was the UK's main source of electricity at around 40%, whereas in 2019, that dropped off to just 2.1%, with this commitment to phase out coal-fired generation by 2025. However, and this is where the opportunity arises, as far as possible, fossil fuel combustion in general needs to and is being replaced primarily with renewables such as wind and solar power, and particularly around our coastline, where we have the greatest intensity of installed offshore wind capacity, and that in the planning. So I think that in itself is a huge statement.
Well, that's fantastic. Let's bring in Katrin from Vattenfall to pick up on that, because you know, if you were, as Mark quite rightly says, to ask people in our part of the world what was happening around net zero, they would talk about wind farms because they're so visible. How effective, Katrin, is wind energy at moving the needle, at getting us there by 2050?
Yeah, hi everybody. First, I just can't let up the opportunity to say, you know, well done, because talking about net zero is one of the most important things we can all do. So thanks for the invitation. Yeah, wind, you know, has become already a huge part of our energy makeup. You know, a few years ago, everybody was very concerned about energy security because, you know, we were also importing energy from other places, maybe politically not so stable as we'd like. So there are lots of reasons why we want to have homegrown energy, and it needs to be clean. So, you know, we have been cutting emissions very effectively, as Mark said, for the last 30 years, but far too slowly, really, for us to keep within these, you know, globally agreed targets. And currently, you know, we frequently have days in the winter where offshore wind and onshore wind together are more than 50% of our UK energy supply that's being used. So you can get these apps now, you know, if you're kind of into watching what's really happening, you can get an app on your phone which tells you, you know, where at any one moment the energy from the UK is coming from. So you can see just how effective solar, wind, and all the other technologies are. It is a really important part, and it's going to be increasingly so. And right now, you know, as Mark pointed out, the UK is the global leader in offshore wind. The eastern region, East Anglia, is the UK leader right now. You know, so this is a fantastic opportunity for the East of England, and we should all be embracing that leadership role and going, yeah, you know, leadership is what we need to reach net zero. We can be part of it, every single one of us. So yeah, great stuff.
So you have, as I said in the introduction, two of the largest, if not the two largest wind farms on the planet. And I know that there's lots of moving this forward, creating even more opportunity. Give us a flavour of what's to come. Tantalize us in Norfolk and Suffolk into the future, what this is all going to look like.
Okay, well, I mean, I wish in Norfolk right now we already had two of the largest offshore wind farms in the world. We've got them in development, and this highlights actually some of the real issues that we all have. You know, we have the technology, we have the capabilities, we are incredibly good now at doing this sort of huge infrastructure project in a very environmentally sensitive way. However, society, you know, we're all guilty of being a bit unsure about change, right? And, you know, this is something that we have to address together as a society to embrace these changes. But, you know, so you can look at the big picture and go, okay, we're going to have all this massive infrastructure in the sea a long way away. Actually, sadly, you won't see them because of the curvature of the earth, even though they're massive. You know, one rotation of the blades of the likely wind turbines we're going to have would power your house for 2 days, just one rotation. So they are really huge. Okay, so the scale is enormous. These two wind farms, Norfolk Vanguard and Norfolk Boreas, would be providing enough energy for nearly 4 million UK homes. So they're massive, but we need to embrace them. We need to accept them. And that's a challenge for all of us. But, you know, you can think about the changes that will come from achieving net zero in the very big scale, but you can also look at them on a much smaller scale. Even in our own areas, you know, where we live, we're likely to have cleaner air. You know, if we address some of the land use changes that we need, we're likely to see much more biodiversity around us. We're likely to use our cars less. We're likely to be more active, you know, in our everyday lives. We're likely to be more localized where we live. So net zero isn't all about massive global issues that happen somewhere else. And, you know, the action little old me takes in my daily life isn't going to make a difference, because it will make a difference in your locality and your everyday life as well. So it requires action on all scales. I think it's, you know, what we're all going to agree on.
Great, thank you. Julia Pike from Sizewell C. Good afternoon to you, Julia. Tell us about the nuclear sector then. What's happening in your sector to move us forward?
So what we're doing is obviously principally building a large power station to sit next to Sizewell B, which is sort of at the moment, well, it's off at the moment when it's online in the summer, putting about 3% of our nation's electricity onto the bars. So Sizewell C will add another 7%. And we've just had an environmental product declaration, which is a very detailed study of the carbon intensity of construction and then over the life cycle, which is currently showing us that, that it's going to come out as one of the very lowest carbon ways that there is to make electricity, which is great news. So aside from the main activity of constructing the power station in as sustainable a way as we are able, we are looking at making hydrogen. So first of all, hydrogen to supply the construction of Sizewell C, because as well as lowering carbon, we're also very keen to lower particulate emissions. And because we're going to look at making hydrogen, and to make hydrogen, you need green electricity. So you need electricity from wind farms, so from Catrin, or you need electricity from nuclear, or you need electricity from solar, or preferably actually in combination, so that you make the most of the different qualities of the technologies. So you've got lots of wind electricity on windy days, lots of solar energy today, plenty of nuclear when it's neither windy nor sunny. That makes the most of the cost of your hydrogen infrastructure. And if we can do that and get the hydrogen going at Sizewell C, And one of the difficult things about getting a new business line going is how can you marry supply and demand? But what we can do, because it's a big project, is we can look at our own demand and match supply, and then we can work out from that to work with lots of other businesses in East Anglia. So we're part of the Freeport East bid, to work with the ports, because port vehicles can run on hydrogen today, to start looking at clean maritime fuel, to talk to the councils around how can we help the councils move over their vehicle fleets to hydrogen where they're not really suitable for electricity, because lots of routes for buses or particularly heavy vehicles not really suitable at the moment to move over to batteries because they don't have long enough life for the rural routes, or alternatively there isn't time to refuel from electricity for the length of time it takes to recharge. So for a category of heavy vehicles, hydrogen is probably the way forward. And something that a big project like Sizewell C can do is it can help act as a catalyst to actually create a domestic hydrogen cluster. And I think if we can get that going with lots and lots of businesses across the region, we'll really see people will see how net zero is actually impacting their lives. Because, for example, if we could get clean buses running through Ipswich, we would have much better air quality, for example. And sometimes a lot of net zero can be seen as sort of a bit hair-shirty, but actually we can, as we start to get impacts into people's daily lives, then people can see that actually we can have a better world. And then, as you mentioned at the start, we are looking at direct air capture. And the reason we're looking at direct air capture in particular is today it's really energy hungry. And what direct air capture is it's a technology which pushes air effectively through a solvent which captures the carbon. And then with the carbon, you can bury it using the infrastructure of the carbon capture and storage technology, so in old oil and gas wells. Or alternatively, you can use the carbon for things where you need carbon, like synthetic fuels, for example. And what the nuclear power station can do is make that an awful lot cheaper, because we have a technology where we think we can use heat rather than electricity. And so if direct air capture becomes affordable, then it's a really great way of achieving net zero. Because sometimes when we're talking about net zero, we focus on the zero, but we don't focus so much on the net. There are some things where it will be really, really hard to take carbon out of the way that we do things today. And so we need some technologies like direct air capture, which can actually help us achieve negative emissions in some places so that we can still carry on with some positive emissions where it's just not really possible to take them out of the atmosphere.
So this is fascinating, really interesting innovations that are coming out of your sector. I've seen when you've spoken on EDF's website, Julia, things like you talk about nuclear being the ethical choice. Is this what you mean in terms of, the words ethical?
Yeah, I mean, the way we'd like to see nuclear is effectively as nuclear sort of becoming like the servant of the system. So we're moving to an increasingly intermittent system with lots of wind, lots of solar. And what nuclear can do, because it chugs out electricity in a non-weather related way, is nuclear can sort of act as the bedrock. And so we've been looking at a lot of things to make sure that nuclear can also operate really flexibly. Because when we talk about flexibility, we don't just have to be talking about, can you put the nuclear reaction up and down? Yes, you can. But why do that? If you need lots of electricity for things like making green hydrogen, then you can achieve flexibility by making sure that you're looking at your system in a really integrated way, which I know is something which Nigel spends a lot of time looking at. How can you have a whole system approach in which you take your different technologies, nuclear, wind, solar, other low carbon power sources, and you actually get the best out of each to get them to work together? Because it's only in them working together that you actually get bills down for consumers. And something that we really need to focus on is that net zero has to be affordable for consumers. Otherwise, it is just not really going to be fair. And we can't allow it to operate effectively as a tax on the less well-off. So there are things which are great. It's great that people can plug their electric cars in and earn some money back from the grid. But we have to remember that only a subsection of the population has an electric car and the infrastructure to plug it back into the grid. Yeah. And so we have to be really focused on keeping costs down for people right across society, and not only for people who can afford the current set of infrastructure, which will enable them to keep their own bills now.
How do you do that? I mean, it sounds like a real challenge.
Well, so that's what the government spends a lot of time looking at. So the team in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, they do an awful lot of modelling of the system. And so what they're modelling is what mix of sources of making electricity is it, which will actually minimise costs for consumers. And so there's been quite a helpful, in the same way that if you've seen the latest position from BEIS around the hydrogen strategy, that they're going to be really focused on carbon intensity. I think there's been a sort of a move away from sort of looking obsessively at the cost of different technologies to looking at what's the cost of the whole bill for the consumer. Because the consumer pays their electricity bill, which is £600 to £700 a year for your average consumer for electricity alone. And what we all have to focus on, and what BEIS is very focused on, is what mix of generating technologies puts that down rather than up. And so effectively, you're looking at really what's the current cost of storage, what's the projected cost of storage, to make sure you've got a smooth, permanently available electricity system at the least cost to consumers.
Okay. So let's talk about technology. Let's talk about digital technology. Penelope from BT is here, and I know BT is closer to carbon neutral now than ever before. So share what you've done, Penelope. Tell us your story.
So hi there, and thanks very much for the invitation today. At BT, we've been championing sustainability for nearly 30 years, actually. We've set our first carbon targets back in 2008. But now we have a net zero target for 2045, and that is for our own operations and also for our supply chain. We have been championing. One is we actually have the second largest fleet in the UK with our Openreach and the BT Engineers, which is over about 32,000 vehicles. And we've been championing actually the phase out of petrol and diesel vehicles. We set up the UK Electric Fleet Coalition, which advocated for the successful bringing forward from 2035 to 2030 these vehicles. So that is extremely important. And just as Julia was mentioning, hydrogen vehicles, these clusters, it's not all just about electric vehicles. We also recognize it's about zero emission, all types of technology driving that. Also, as you know, at the Openreach and BT, we have an obligation, or we've set aside that we are going to, I believe it's 25 million households will have fibre. We also recognize with COVID and everybody been working from home, that the importance of technology in this role. Look at it today, it's hosting our webinar, it's avoiding any travel emissions, and it is the future and key to underlying many of those technologies and innovations that will require, the internet or networks to actually run on. So that's just an example of what we've been up to. We're also key on renewable electricity. So last year, we achieved our target to run our business on 100% renewable electricity globally. That's been a big feat, but it's also key, driving additionality for renewable energy is key to driving net zero. The government has recently announced that they're implementing the 6th carbon budget, and part of that, we need to have a zero emission grid by 2035. So we need people and large organizations to demand renewable electricity, and that will help to create additional. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, I guess if I'm watching this as an SME, so maybe I employ 100 people, maybe I actually employ considerably less. I'm probably thinking BT, going really well, but huge company. They really can, with their global reach, do this stuff. How can I, if I'm a small business owner, make a difference?
So one of the key things, as previously mentioned, was renewable electricity. It is available to everyone, and it is one of the key and easiest things businesses can do, is make sure that they are signed up to and supporting a 100% green tariff. That's a simple thing to do. We've also recently partnered with the Exponential Roadmap and the UK government, and the UK government has launched something called the SME Climate Hub. And on that Climate Hub, there is tools to help SMEs in particular set net zero plans. And that is also key, I believe, if their businesses, in particular small ones or medium, are interested in this, that knowledge is being shared from larger corporations like BT, IKEA, Unilever, Ericsson, we help to set up this initiative and help with writing and these documents that will help, you know, businesses take that journey, commence it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, here at Archant, and we employ about 1,000 staff, and we recently sort of overhauled our technology, and just the removal of old clunky monitors and fresh new super efficient ones has made a massive, I mean, a ridiculously large impact to our bill. And the point I make is it can just be something like you're changing a computer monitor that can make all the difference. But that's really interesting. We need to kind of get hold of the URL for that hub so we can push that out to the audience here today. We'll talk more about skills and about technology in a little while, but let's bring in Philip from British Sugar now. So hi there, Philip. You're head of sustainability. British Sugar have 3 factories in Norfolk and Suffolk, which understandably produce carbon emissions, but you've become very much focused on the wider sustainability issue. Tell us about your story.
Yeah, thanks very much again for the invite, and some really interesting insights into the other companies so far as well from the other panelists. Producing sugar from sugar beet in the UK as a homegrown crop is a really interesting industry in many ways, which I've been involved with for many years. And it's really the circular kind of approach to a circular economy and the co-products that we produce from that sugar beet as well. So it's not just about sugar production for us. It's we have a variety of agricultural related co-products, which would include such as stones and soil that come in with the sugar beet. We clean those up, dry them and sell them on as co-products. We have a liming product, which is a part of the processing of the sugar beet, which we then dry and sell to farms and farmers as a pH correction in soil. But then we've got some other downstream co-products such as bioethanol. We had the first bioethanol plant in the UK at one of our sites in Norfolk. And we also generate our own electricity and heat. So it's fundamental to the operation of a sugar beet factory, which a sugar beet only has about 17% sugar in it. So there's a huge amount of water in there that ultimately needs to be evaporated off to produce a crystallized product. So whilst we have an electricity base load on site, we also have a very significant heat demand to do that evaporation and crystallization processes. So all of our sugar factories, we've got 4 in total in the UK, 3 in East Anglia, all have their own combined heat and power plant, which in its own way drives an efficiency of using that energy that is being converted into heat and electricity. And I think it's fair to say that over the years, and I'm going back 30, 40 years and beyond, we're an industry that's been around for over a century in East Anglia and other parts of the UK. And we've really driven kind of energy efficiency, energy reduction hard over those years in all sorts of ways through investment, activities such as continuous improvement, utilisation of waste heat. And we've tried to invest when we think we've seen changes coming, because this is a core part of our process. It's not producing an end product. Clearly, it's got what we would call as a co-product through electricity export onto the grid at the sites. And we invested in gas turbine technology at 2 of the sites just over 20 years ago. And we're now starting to realise and think, what are the next investments that we need to make to enable us to stay ahead of the curve, to enable us to move towards I hesitate to say to net zero, but move in that direction, but ultimately move along the decarbonisation journey, of which we've moved along, but we've got some fundamental decisions that we'll be making in the years to come in terms of how we try and move along that trajectory to achieve net zero. It is a very significant area of work for us, and it's almost coming front and centre in terms of part of our strategy as a business.
My next question was going to be, has your business pivoted or adapted? But it sounds like you've been doing this stuff for many generations. Where did it all start? Was it essentially just good business? Or did somebody at British Sugar sit and have the vision of, moving forward in a sustainable way, perhaps before it became on the agenda or on the radar that it is today?
I think it's a bit of both, really, because I think if you look back in terms of I go back to the circular economy, the co-products we produce, we ultimately produce a very small quantity of waste. It's a couple of 100 grams per ton of product, which in reality is quite a small quantity given the sort of tonnages we're talking about. We process about 7 to 8 million tons of sugar beet a year and supply over half of the nation's sugar demand. And so with the co-products I talk about, it's a bit of both. There's in some respects been a bit of legislation that's driving us that way, and there's also been a bit of, well, there's a material that we need to make a use of. Can we create a market and a need for that? And we've been successful in doing that, although it's fair to say that's taken a period of time to get there. So talk about our topsoil business, which has a number of different products for different applications through to sports field top dressings, golf courses. We supplied quite a quantity of material of topsoil down to the Olympics Park when that was being built in just before 2012, I suppose. But there's all sorts of applications that we look at for those sorts of things, and it's the same around some of the other co-products. We actually try and extract as much sugar that we can out of the sugar beet but that also leads to other extractable chemicals are the wrong word, materials that have other uses that we're able to take out through separation technology that we also do as well. So we do look at these things. We're not necessarily at the forefront of technology, but we keep our finger fairly close to the pulse. And I think all the things that we talk about, and we've talked about here in terms of energy supply and energy, ways of decarbonising, we're pretty conversant with. It's all about, for us, picking the right one and having some confidence in longevity with government support for the development of the rollout of these technologies, that we're not going to pick a horse that isn't back, because ultimately, whilst it's not our core area of business, we need this as an infrastructure to enable our sites to operate efficiently and effectively. And in the meantime, we will continue to look at how we can use less energy, we can use energy more efficiently, utilize more waste heat, to try and do some of the things that we can do within our control to an extent.
So topsoil, fish food, tomatoes, it's fascinating, isn't it? As a head of sustainability, let me put the question to you, Philip, that I put to others, and that is, if I'm a small business, perhaps I'm a business that, I just sell widgets. Where do I start in improving my carbon emissions? What would be your advice?
Yeah, good question, which I knew was coming. But it's always a difficult one to answer, trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think, if you're a smaller business, lower carbon emissions, I think you've got to look at kind of understanding where those carbon emissions are coming from, the point sources of them. If you're running a large logistics fleet or relatively large logistics fleet, that's where I go to start off with. I think similarly, if you're running warehousing and kind of manufacturing operations, albeit on a smaller basis, I think you'll probably look at what sort of fuels and energy you're using. I suspect it's probably going to be driven by electricity. There is options and opportunity to utilise green electricity. There's also opportunities, I think, to supply your own electricity, depending on how much risk you want to take potentially, or how aspirational you are in wanting to do so. But I think there's some bread and butter stuff that I would just do good energy management practice. It's about trying to get into the hearts and minds of the leadership of those businesses, the owners, if that's the case, and the employees. So just doing small stuff, and you talked about changing out computer screens to more efficient ones. I think some of this stuff starts there as well. I think you've got to understand what it means by turning monitors off, turning lights off, trying to use energy more efficiently, getting more efficient equipment and machinery, and just making people aware of it's not just the business, it's for them, it's for the employees, and just trying to get into the hearts and minds of people that are working in the business, I think, is probably one of the fundamentals I'd suggest getting in place to start off with.
Excellent. That really neatly leads on to my next question, and this is a question for all of the panel. Please don't be shy. Jump in and answer. And the question is, if I'm watching this as someone who works in an organization, and I totally understand it, but I've got to go to my CEO or I've got to get to my board, and they maybe understandably say, look, we're just coming out the back of a pandemic, this is going to have to wait. What are your tips about not only getting this on the agenda, but perhaps more importantly, keeping it on the agenda? And I'm going to open that up to whoever wants to give me an answer. Don't forget to take yourselves off mute.
Yeah, I've got some views there.
Nigel.
Which is slightly answering a different question about corporate governance. But actually, you need the corporate governance that brings that focus. We've needed it for a long time. We probably need it even more now. And, you know, I've worked in organizations where somebody's been responsible for understanding carbon footprints, and it's been almost like staff getting together at lunchtime and doing it as a kind of light entertainment.
Right.
It is absolutely fundamental within today's organization to have that clear accountability at a senior level, with boards very literate on the subject and with CEOs tasked with bringing forward improvements and delivery of targets. Very, very key. The other thing that organizations, in my view, need to think a lot more about, and I think Penelope touched on this in her remarks, where she talks about what we in the industry call scope 3 emissions. So those are the emissions that arise from people who provide services to you. So you need a framework to understand what their carbon footprint is, so that you can encourage them and incentivize them likewise to take actions. Because it comes back to the point you made right at the beginning. Do I need to do it now? The answer is yes. Therefore, we need a fundamental shift in corporate governance to deliver that.
Okay, Catherine, I see you've taken yourself off mute there. You've got something to add, no doubt?
Yeah, I do. So the government recently, in March, published some net zero public dialogue information. And, you know, one of the key things that the public look for, and we are all the public as well as our kind of corporate roles or our business roles, and that is leadership. And so to reiterate, you know, hopefully, if you're your business's leader, you're thinking about this already. If you're not, then hopefully there is somebody in your business that is thinking about this already. So our CEO, Anna Borg, was at the White House Climate Summit recently talking about not only Vattenfall's net zero journey. So our mission is to be enable all our customers to live climate smarter rules within one generation. But we're saying that's not enough. We have to help those companies that produce the raw materials to produce carbon-free steel, for example. And it was really talking about that kind of initiative that she was invited to the White House to talk about. So, you know, we can all be pushing further. I think you've had also some really good tips from Penelope about the amount of information that really is out there. And, you know, one thing that maybe we haven't talked about so much yet is, you know, following the science. We've talked about, yes, you know, popular figures in our culture pushing this agenda, which is great, but actually scientists have been pushing this agenda for, you know, decades and longer. So we should all be looking at science-led targets as well. But those kind of popular initiatives, like in 2010, we had 10 in 10, or, you know, reduce your emissions by 10% in 2010. Every year there are things like this coming up, and they're really motivating. You know, if you get your team on them, if you get your, you know, it can be a sports club as well. It can be, you know, the Scouts group. It's something for really everybody. And that's how we create the demand side as well. And that's how we also, you know, drive those Norfolk and Suffolk businesses to be more green. You know, we all have more power in this topic than I think we grant ourselves.
Good point. Sophia, I see you've unmuted yourself. Anything to add on keeping this on the agenda?
I agree with everything that Nigel and Catherine have said. I'd just like to mention the work we're doing with the Leiston Town Council on an engineered route map to make Leiston net zero, because I think a lot of this, as well as making sure that the transition really is fair for people and that people are not losing their livelihoods without alternative green jobs, and that bills are not going up to a level which people simply can't afford. We're not going to start treating electricity sort of as effectively more as a commodity than as what it really is now, which is almost a necessity akin to water, really. Very hard for people to live their lives without electricity these days. So we're working with the town council in Leiston. We've created with them an engineered route map, and I think as it's something which Kwasi Kwarteng has said a few times, which is that we have all the technologies we need in reality to get to net zero today. What we don't have really is yet sufficient public buy-in. And so what we are hoping Net Zero Leiston will help to show is that in operating sort of like Dragon's Den, in which we bring forward ideas saying, do people want their houses insulated, clad? Do people want the installation of electric vehicle charging points, solar panels on roofs, etc.? We will actually establish what are the socially acceptable ways to move a community towards net zero, and really discover what are the barriers. You know, lots of barriers are ones which aren't always obvious to people at a high level. If you live in a town which has very little public transport, you're going to keep driving your car. And so one thing is to think about the technologies, but another thing is to really focus on people's lived experiences and what you can do collectively to make those lived experiences, first of all, better, and second of all, net zero compatible.
Okay, let's talk about skills now. And this comes in two parts. The first is about the skills that we have in businesses right now. Is it enough, or do we need to upskill our current workforce, and I guess how? So putting that out there to our panel, I think we've got a little system going here whereby if you want to answer, you unmute yourself, and then I can look on my screen and direct it to the right person. Philip, there you go. Get in there first on this. Upskilling our staff, how?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts have come to mind. I think we have quite a number of good quality engineers of various fields that are based across our sites, both working on optimization type projects and also capital projects and investment projects. And I think generally we found that if you've got a good engineer, they can lend their hand to different fields and different expertises within their area of field. So I don't think we necessarily view us being in a position of needing to go out and recruit a load of people to try and work on carbon reduction projects, because I think we've got them. It's technology application and working out how you can fit it into your business and understanding what the benefits are, and so you can then pull together a sensible investment case. That's kind of good practice, really. I think the bit that we're learning and there's a journey to go on is the digitalization piece, to be honest. We are embarking on a much greater digitalization. Not trying to be ageist, I think I'm a bit old for it, but I think there's certainly a whole bunch of people in our organisation who are really engaged in that, really keen, and we're starting to learn the capability and what you can do with an iPad or an iPhone or a phone of any sort just out on plant. So I can see our future being driven by much more flexible working out on plant. Central control rooms might not exist anymore. You can optimize things on site when you're not on site, and I think that's all going to help a little bit of this. So you're going to have a lot more flexibility driven, and I think that's one of the things that probably is coming out of pandemic. People are looking for flexibility. I think increased digitalization is going to come quickly, and I think if you start marrying some of those things together, we can use them usefully to support a carbon reduction journey as well.
Penelope from BT, you'll want to pick up on that, no doubt.
Yes, so just a few comments on that. There was a report by, I think, the Cambridge Econometrics, and they talked about the transition to EVs, that it will actually result in a need for an extra 30,000 roles in the sort of the green space, whether that's in, the gigafactories, rolling out EV charge points. There is a huge transition, and people, a lot of those skills already exist in people who are trained as electricians or electrical engineers. So there is definitely a transition and a need for reskilling people in these roles. And we talked briefly about digitalization as well there from Philip. BT have a goal to provide 10 million people with digital skills. And we achieved this year, I believe it was in the last year, we gave 10 million people some type of training on that internet. It's key to driving these changes. Technology is the future is seen as helping, potentially IoT technology is seen to help reduce carbon emissions by up to 20%. And so it is key that people and the future generations really understand how technology can enable that, and that they have the right and correct skills to help drive these reductions. Thanks.
Okay, great. And talking about sort of second part to this question then, as you just picked up on, Penelope, and that is the next generation. How do we inspire the next generation, not only to be thinking about the environment, because as we've already established, lots of younger people this is their primary concern, understandably. How do we get them to engage with working in the energy sector? Because I still, maybe would think, would it be a first choice for a sort of a typical 16, 18-year-old coming out of school or college? What more can be done? Catherine, you're doing a lot of work in this, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. And actually, we're finding that, young people are incredibly receptive, and they're, of course, a joy to work with. They're so enthusiastic. But, you are right. It looks like there will be a kind of a global STEM skilled gap, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And so it's really important to sort of make sure people aren't put off those subjects really young, so that the whole kind of approach from quite young children through to graduates or as Penelope said, people reskilling, you have to look at every opportunity to keep people engaged or bring people in. And that's one of the things I think that the Prime Minister has been talking about recently in relation to the 10-point plan. He's also thinking about having skills budgets for every individual, so we can have a just transition from people who have got amazing offshore skills, for example, from their years in oil and gas, and they can quite easily transfer over, taking a lot of those skills with them into offshore wind or green gas operations, for example. So I think the thing that we have to remember is that young people really want to be involved in this change. They see it as of paramount importance, and young people, in our experience, love working with real problems and real data. So we share our real data that our wind farm design engineers use, and they play around and they design their own things, and they take things often to the next level. They do very inventive and creative things with the data and the tools that we give them. So I think it's about trying to keep people engaged, give them real problems to work on, and keep providing those diverse opportunities, and be very open to a much more diverse workforce as well. An engineer isn't maybe the stereotypical picture that some of us have in our heads about an engineer. And also, in all these new roles, in all these new technologies, there are a myriad of roles. You need lawyers, you need communicators, you need all sorts of people. So it's not just about engineering either.
Julia, anything to add?
Well, I think I'd just add that some of what we need to do, particularly to make sure that we're offering the most roles we can to people in the UK, is we need to make sure that we're working with the further education colleges, and obviously back into schools, but in particular with the colleges who we need to deliver the skills. And the more that the energy industry and other industries can join up to create common skills qualifications, the better people's opportunities are going to be, so that they can see a whole career in building different forms of low carbon energy. And that does take a degree of joining up with the government as well, to make sure that the colleges are funded to provide the courses all in due time, and that we can recruit people into the courses. Colleges are funded, they can move into work, it requires a degree of sort of working together, project to government, and preferably within industries and across industries, to make sure that we're making the most of it for people.
Yeah,
Oh.
I'd absolutely just agree with that. You know, on those sorts of things, it has to be a collaborative effort, and we have to get really much better at understanding the numbers of different kinds of jobs that are going to be needed, so the colleges can prepare the right kind of cohorts and things. You know, that is really fundamental.
Mark, you've got a bird's eye view of the energy sector. You must have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that, particularly this region, we've been serving the energy sector for the last 50 years. So a lot of these skills are just part of our region in the first place. In more recent years as well, we've seen the introduction through the Skills for Energy program with the East Coast College, in terms of running the pre-apprenticeships and the apprenticeships in a cross-energy type apprenticeship, as opposed to just one specific part of the energy sector. And also we've seen the introduction, of course, at the University of East Anglia, of the energy engineering courses that are being run as well. And Katrine talking about collaboration, and that those courses were very much set up through collaboration with the industry and the colleges to make those happen. So I think moving forward, this isn't something new for us. This is about making sure that we carry the momentum that we've already got at pace and increase that. I think what we perhaps have to be a little careful of is there is the political agenda with this leveling up, as they say, as the investment moves further north in the country. So what we have to be loud and clear about is, don't waste the skills and the opportunities for investment that are already in this region. Let's capitalize on what's been a really good start and make some more of it. So I think more of that collaboration, more about promoting the opportunities that are here on the ground, and that's got to be give us a real good start.
And Nigel just sort of finishes off on this subject around skills.
Yeah, it's not purely on skills. I mean, organisations like Sizewell C and Vattenfall are very focused on making sure that they have the necessary capabilities, and they put a lot of effort into sourcing these locally, and that's really great. But there is a broader capability issue, capacity issue, and it kind of takes us a little bit from the electricity decarbonisation piece into heat and transport. I mean, to actually achieve some of the targets that government is setting, 600,000 heat pumps by 2028 going in per annum. I think even in the east of England, 2.6 million EVs by 2030 if they're to hit their transport targets. We need to have a much more nuanced and coordinated strategy for delivery across skills, not just engineering skills and the things that go with the big assets, but also the things that get change delivered for people in the homes, because once they start changing their buying choices, they will want to know that they can invest in these new low carbon technologies and the things that will hopefully make a difference to their everyday lives. So there's a big piece at the lower end, and we need to make sure that this region is able to adapt and respond accordingly.
Thank you. Right, well, let's get into questions. As I said at the start, this is your conversation, everybody. So hover over your screen, you'll see the Q&A tab at the bottom, and please ask away and it will come into our feed. I'm going to start off with a question from Brian. And he says, you can make a product which is very green, but if your supply chain is full of parts flown in from overseas, it will never really have an impact. What sort of changes might people make in their supply chains? It's a great question. I'm looking for a light on the board here from someone who wants to answer. Penelope, there you go. Over to you.
Hi there. You can make many changes with supply chain. First, engaging with them. So the last year, we've written out to our top 300 suppliers. We've asked them, I believe it was Katrina or Julia mentioned, to set science-based targets, to actually set zero emissions targets. And that requires them to, first of all, understand their own impacts. We work with them also on helping them undertake energy audits, establishing renewable energy, but getting them to buy into it and just understand what their emissions are and how they can address them themselves. That's one of the key things to do, is purely its engagement with them. And if you're leading by example, sharing your expertise with them too. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything to add from anybody else? Sharing expertise. Katrin, go on.
I'm going to combine. I spotted another question there as well. So, engaging with the supply chain is crucial, and collaborating with the supply chain and coming up with solutions together is a really smart way of doing it. And remembering that, we are all moving in this direction, and therefore, if it's good business for you, it's also good business for your supplier. So I said I was going to combine. Somebody in the questions mentioned subsidies for offshore wind, and there's maybe a little bit of a misunderstanding about how energy subsidies work. But so for offshore wind, the developers put all the money up front, and that's, billions of pounds to build these big projects. And then we sell the energy at a sort of fixed rate, and that's where the subsidy comes in. But in order to attract or win that subsidy, we have to go through a lot of things, including working much more efficiently and better with our UK supply chain. So there are now limits about your minimum levels of UK supply chain that you involve. And all of this is, one of those mechanisms or levers that government has, or, sometimes local leadership might apply the same kinds of levers. There's a little bit of carrot and stick going on. We do it all the time at home, and it happens in business as well, that we think, okay, how can we make this work better between us? And it's by rewarding good practice and maybe rejecting the not so good practice. So
Okay, looking through the list here, I'm going to pick up a question which talks about heat pumps. Doesn't say who this is from. It says, I'm concerned about the drive for heat pumps as a route, or one route, to achieving net zero. They're only suitable for well-insulated houses, and also if every household in Scotland were to install a heat pump, the national grid would not be able to cope. I'm interested in hearing the views of the guest speakers on this. Heat pumps. Nigel.
It's a bit of a Marmite issue, heat pumps. A lot of people think they're a panacea, electrify everything, put them in everybody's homes. The practicalities, as the questioner has suggested, are much more complex. You need a combination of efficiency investments in the home, not just heat pumps. Some houses aren't suitable for heat pumps, and we need to do a lot more thinking of how we might meet the huge need to decarbonise heat generally. And heat pumps are part of the solution, but as your questioner has highlighted, they are not a universal panacea.
Thank you. Philip.
Yeah, I think I just come in on a general point here, and I think it probably extends what Nigel just said. I think from a decarbonisation point of view, and particularly on heat decarbonisation, there is not going to be one technology that delivers the holy grail. It is going to be a mixture of stuff and technologies, some of which we might even not know about at the moment. And I think heat pumps into homes, I think, is great, but it needs to be designed properly like everything else. And I just think a blend of different technologies is likely to what's going to get us as close as possible to net zero. And I think when the broader society start to understand that, they'll understand what is right for the homes and understand what is right for their industry. But there needs to be some intelligence to help decipher that for people and organisations.
Thank you. Next question. It's been estimated that 5 billion YouTube views burn as much energy as 40,000 homes do in 1 year. as life gets more and more digital and we move towards net zero, is this going to be a problem? Penelope from BT.
Hi there. So I'm not sure where those statistics come from, but there are a lot of incorrect ones in the media, actually. I believe if it's from Mike Berners-Lee, who was recently quoted, he's actually corrected those. But the Carbon Trust have just recently or about to relaunch a report today or tomorrow, which actually shows that in the UK, the average, I think, half an hour of streaming is the equivalent to about 55 grams of carbon, which is boiling your kettles 3 times. So the impact there, I think, has been overly exaggerated. But I do recognize data has been increasing. I believe some recent reports show that data's increased by 550% in data centers around the world globally. Yet on the other hand, the energy consumption has actually improved or has remained static over the past 5 years. And us ourselves at BT, while we've also seen an exponential increase, we've actually cut energy consumption by 7% across our networks over the past 5 years. So there isn't exactly a correlation that you could say, okay, data is increasing, energy consumption is increasing. Technology is becoming more and more efficient. For example, fiber doesn't require electricity to run along the network, whereas a copper network, it ran on electricity. So there's huge savings in the development in technology. So,
thank you. Let's talk about electric vehicles. A couple of questions have come in. Is there a firm date set around new builds, so new build homes being built with EV chargers? And if so, does this cover just one point per property, or would it be a charging point per vehicle parking space? So Julia and then Nigel.
I was actually just going to comment on what Penelope was saying, and just to say that, of course, you know, the making sure that data centers, etc., run on low carbon electricity is a lot of the answer to this question around data use and carbon. I don't actually know that there is a particular law on EV charging per dwelling. Nigel's shaking his head. I don't think there is. And of course, if we think about all those people who live in flats or, you know, even in houses in multiple occupancy, we can see that, you know, this is something where we're going to have to really think through how to make fair access for all people to charging points.
I think I can comment on that, actually. I think it's the Part L building regs which are being updated. I think from 2025, new homes, if they have a off car park space, will require it. And then in car parks, it will be, I think they were proposing 20% of car park places for new builds of apartments, or if you were to undertake major renovations of a site, then it would be 20% of a car park. And that would also, I think, potentially apply to businesses who own car parks. If they were to undertake a major refurb, they would potentially have to do this to their car park. But I think it's 2025 from memory.
Okay, an additional question, talking about service areas. Is there an overall plan for setting out the installation of service areas with fast charging nationwide? And that's going to be a bit of an issue, isn't it, in our part of the world, where in many parts of Norfolk and Suffolk we're so rural. Nigel.
Yeah, this is a good example of one of the areas where we're beginning to discover what we don't know. There is a consultation around putting in charging points in designated places, including new homes. But what is missing is any coordinated policy towards ensuring that there is a coordinated charging network, particularly in more remote and distant places, which many people see large parts of Norfolk and Suffolk as being. I bought an EV a year ago, and it is very, very difficult getting it charged up on the North Norfolk coast, I can tell you. The thinking around this has been very slow to evolve. Government is promising a decarbonisation for transport strategy, but it was promising that 18 months ago, and the thinking is lagging what the market is doing. And it is another example of the kind of capability issue that we need to properly address now so that we can develop clear route maps going forward. But it is very difficult for your average punter, even if they can afford an EV, making sure that they have the right charging support in the right places. So we have to think much harder about that infrastructure.
Penelope.
Yeah, just as I mentioned earlier, we're BT, a part of the UK Electric Fleet Coalition, and some of our policy asks are we definitely recognise that there is a lack of public infrastructure currently, and that we need to sorry, and that we need to accelerate this. I believe the report from the Cambridge Econometrics said we need 200,000 public EV charging, infrastructure by 2030. We have around 20-odd thousand now, so that's a huge growth and acceleration. So yes, policy is key to that. The government should be launching their green or white paper this year on their plans, but we're definitely keeping up with the advocacy work and trying to drive stronger policy commitments to this.
Thank you. Andy Holland has a question. It's been mentioned, he says, that we are, as a region, are seen as leading the way and that we also have great opportunities on the horizon. However, we're still experiencing challenges and issues and unfortunate delays to significant projects. What can we do as a region collectively to accelerate these developments, and what will the impact be to our net zero implication or obligations if we don't do this in a timely manner?
I've got my mic open.
Catherine.
I'm happy to answer this one. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I mean, the East of England is extremely well placed as a leader. You've got perfect sea conditions, very strong wind, great stakeholders, lots of skills, all those things. And really, this is such a burgeoning industry that now is the time to maintain that leadership and really embed it. And I think the kinds of delays that we're experiencing now means that, we may be losing our grip on that leadership, because offshore wind and all other renewable industries really are sort of sprouting up all over the world. It's a global supply chain, generally speaking. At the moment, the UK has a huge part of that global supply chain, especially on the kind of O&M side, where we have that long-term leadership from O&M of oil and gas and things as well. And so really losing our grip on that leadership, letting it slip away because of these big delays, will just mean that, the work will go elsewhere, the investment will go elsewhere, because every one of the speakers has mentioned sort of investor confidence at some point or other in the decision-making process that any business leader will make if he or she decides to, invest in a greener way of doing things. You require confidence that there'll be some kind of longevity for your product or service. It's the same in energy. If the confidence in the UK isn't there anymore, then the developers won't be there anymore either. So it's an important question.
Julia.
I think I have to say that because I think, as the question highlighted, East Anglia, it has fantastic offshore wind, it has solar, it's got the whole infrastructure of the southern North Sea and opportunities for CCUS, and it has nuclear. I think that there is an opportunity for the East of England to sort of get more political attention by showing how well the East of England can actually make the whole energy system work together. We're perfectly placed to have an integrated low carbon energy approach and to make like a domestic hydrogen cluster to really show to other regions, because the East of England benefits from this extraordinary opportunity with having most low carbon technologies present in it, to show actually what can be done. And I think that does have the potential to seize political imagination and maybe get some more attention back into the East of England.
And just to sort of pick up on that, there's some fantastic institutions in the East of England. UEA have been, global leaders in the science behind climate change and leading to net zero as well. Organizations like the LEP and Norfolk and Suffolk Limited, there are a lot of great organizations all working together, EDF, Vattenfall, a number of the members of the panel, we've all been speaking to each other about this kind of thing. And I think, you know, the cluster, the region does need to sort of, try and hit a little bit harder and get the political recognition and that it deserves, you know, because there's a long history and there's a great future as well.
And I think that the Freeport East bid succeeding, I think that can be one aspect of getting political attention, and that, you know, that had fantastic cross-party, cross-industry, the whole of the energy industries supporting the Freeport bid, and shows that, you know, when something can be brought together in that way, it can actually succeed.
Nigel, would you like to add something? I can see that your microphone has been switched on.
It's really just to reiterate really a couple of elements of the last 2 points, which is, you know, that there is a documented risk that industrial clusters, places further north, get more attention from policymakers, and that will continue unless we actually put in a good show to say that we actually have a different way of thinking. We have unique assets. We have a very different set of economic drivers. We don't have large industrial loads, but we do have, we do have a very vibrant agriculture sector. We've got the free ports that Julie has mentioned. We have the legacy assets in the North Sea. Very few places have the kind of basic ingredients that we have at scale, and we need to mobilize that in a way that makes sense for the region. And that's one of the reasons why we're pushing the argument around trying something different about building up a hydrogen economy from the ground level up. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities, a lot of interactions, but we need to make sure we get that political focus in a more sustained way than perhaps we have been getting recently.
Okay, this dovetails nicely into the next question. Simon Papworth, is there another region in the UK that the panel can think of that have the same combination of hydrogen, nuclear and renewable power generation? Simon says, do we have something identifiably distinct in Norfolk and Suffolk, and wondering if there's a chance for us to testbed some opportunities?
Yeah,
Mark.
If I can come in there, perhaps. I think it's a great question from Simon. I think it is something, the fact that we have so many contributors to sources of energy is a huge advantage, but probably in recent years, it's probably worked as a disadvantage more than an advantage. I think only now, when we're looking at a package of solutions, is when we see our region really coming to the fore and probably being recognized for being that USP of having all the component parts. And to answer Simon's question, I'm not aware of any other part of the country that has all three. And when I say all three or four, I'll use the traditional of gas, of offshore wind, and of nuclear. Obviously, there's hydrogen coming in, there's solar as well, but certainly those original three, which are still the biggest producers today, and there's no other part of the country that has the same combination as we do. So yeah, but going back to some of probably the previous question, we need to harness that and really promote it. I think everyone recognizes, the public and everyone, that climate change we've got to tackle it. Zero, net zero towards that goal is an absolute must do. And we just need to ensure that in doing that, the changes that people will have to perhaps endure in certain parts of the countryside or whatever, it's for the greater good. And we somehow have to balance that and make sure that the impacts on individuals isn't too great, but we still achieve the goals of achieving net zero by bringing in these big opportunities around that USP that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question because we've still got a number of questions to get through, and I know we've only got 10 minutes on the clock. This one's from John. John Best says, do BT, a question for you, Penelope, see yourselves as supporting the balanced mix of energy by entering into commercial PPAs directly with low carbon energy providers?
Yes, so BT, we have PPAs. We have, I think, for the last year, it accounted for 12% of our total consumption. One of them actually is an 8 megawatt solar farm in just outside of Ipswich that powers our research centre there. We also have wind farms in Scotland and also Wales. We're constantly reviewing that, the opportunities there, and we do believe that large organizations, especially like BT, we consume nearly 1% of the UK's power. And we have a responsibility for adding additionality of renewables onto the grid. And that's what I believe the responsible of large organizations like ourselves, because we have the financial backing, we're much more of an attractive investment, whereas for smaller companies, it is hard. There's also that opportunity through large organizations to offer sustainable supply chain financing also to help SMEs and other suppliers in there who wish to actually sign into those sort of PPAs as well. And I think that is something smaller companies should speak to some of their larger customers about whether they offer these sorts of incentives or opportunities too.
Thank you. Gary Williams, there is a massive surge in interest in geothermal energy as baseload net zero. And with new technologies now being developed, including companies in our area to enable energy from deep geothermal to be accessed anywhere. Are the experts in this panel aware of this? And are you tracking the progress and successes that are now taking place?
Yes.
Nigel.
Absolutely. It was something that, to be honest, I didn't know a huge amount about until about 9 months ago, but there are a couple of local developers who are looking at geothermal developments, including near Hunstanton, which apparently has some superb conditions for accessing the heat. And in the work we're doing with hydrogen, we're exploring the possibility of a bid into the latest BEIS hydrogen supply competition, which is just about to be launched. And this seems to be a good example of an integrated energy project, the whole systems thinking that Julia mentioned, that should play well into a competition like that. So yes, we are, and I agree, it's very exciting.
Louise, what do you think about the power tower for wind energy? And many of us in Texas suffered greatly from electric power shortages in the unseasonably cold weather back in February. Have you been following the analysis of what happened in Texas so that such an event is unlikely to happen in the UK? And I don't see anybody with their microphone on. So I'm going to ask Mark, who has put his hand up to answer this one. Mark.
Yeah, not so much a solution, I would suggest, but probably, yes, I did follow the story in Texas, and it probably took me back, probably showing my age now, to the power cuts we experienced in the UK back in the 70s and the impact that had. I think the difference back then, of course, is we were all still warm because we were heated by coal fires. We had hot water from the back boilers, and most things you could fill up your car with petrol still because there were mechanical pumps, not electric. You could still go to the bank. We used cash, not cards, etc., etc. You could even use the telephone system because mobiles didn't exist. Imagine if we had the power cuts today, the impact they would have on society. So I think it's just, no phones, no computers, couldn't do this today. So many things. So I just think it is worth thinking about. And I think looking back, even in the UK last year, I think we came, or was it 2 years ago, we came very, very close to an outage. when a couple of sources of supply or stations went down. So, yeah, National Grid has a challenge for sure. And particularly as we go through the transition, sustaining that supply is going to be really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you. James has a question. Are there partnerships developing with other users, perhaps aquaculture, who could share the space used by the offshore wind farms? Good question. Catherine.
Yes, yes, there are. And I think, this is another imperative, because just like we've all noticed, there's less space on land. The space in the sea is also now, increasingly pressured, because we're all talking about 40 gigawatts by 2030 for offshore wind for the UK, but for net zero by 2050, the numbers of offshore wind farms are expecting to be 75 gigawatts. So, there's a long way to go, and throughout Europe, hundreds of gigawatts as well. So we really are going to have to be much smarter about how we use our seascape as well, and to coexist better, with nature, with other marine users. And aquaculture at offshore wind farms is a real possibility. About 12 or 15 years ago, I did a little trial at a wind farm off North Wales, looking at that, and it really can be done. And one thing that we haven't touched upon quite so much in this conversation is the need for us all to think about how we eat as well. And of course, there's a huge possibility for getting protein from the sea that isn't fish. I don't know how many people have watched Seascape recently, but that's quite scary. But, we have to be smarter, things like that. And in the Netherlands now, for example, that's part of the legislation too, that wind farm developers have to look at ways of collaborating with other sectors. And I think, there is a willingness to do that. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll see more of that.
Time for a couple more questions. Simon, do you think the COVID pandemic has been a positive or a negative for getting to net zero? Surely more people working from home is good, but then I worry businesses may not have the money to keep it on the table with the other financial challenges. We'll be interested in hearing the panel's view on COVID. We've got through nearly 90 minutes and we've barely talked about COVID. This must be one of the only webinars that hasn't in the last 15 months. But anybody want to go on that one?
Yeah, I'll have a quick go if you like. Tom, yeah, no problem. I think COVID and coming out of, or hopefully coming out of the pandemic, has probably created some urgency associated with net zero and people and transition towards that state. And created a huge amount of interest and potential opportunity. What I think is lacking a little bit is more of a coordinated approach. I think there's opportunities to work cross business. I think there's a bit more coordination needed from government, if I'm honest, in terms of the activity and how they see the world panning out in the UK. So I think it's been positive. I think it's opportunistic at the moment, and there's a bit of cluttered thinking in some ways, and I think a bit of clarity would be good to be brought to the longer term planning. And I think some of the outputs from government that we're expecting over the next 6 months or so will hopefully bring some of that, because I think that will certainly help business plan their own trajectory in terms of how they're going to progress on a decarbonisation route.
Okay, thank you. Final question of the day goes to Peter, who says 30 years seems like a long time away. Myself and others in my leadership team will have all long retired by then. How do we empower the business leaders of tomorrow to be thinking about net zero now?